What is the scariest thing that has ever happened to you, paranormal or otherwise? Story 1. My mom used to work long hours, so growing up it wasn't uncommon for her to leave me and my sister by ourselves. Anyway, one night we were downstairs watching TV when we heard banging from upstairs. We thought that perhaps the cats were fighting, so we went up to sort them out. However, when we went upstairs, we realized that the shower was on and the door was locked. We went back downstairs and huddled together, convinced we were about to die. After hearing some more banging, my sister decides to brave it and gets the spare key to the bathroom. She opened the door to find the bathroom window wide open and the shower on full blast. We still don't know what happened that night. Gives me shivers thinking about it though. Story 2. One night I went to take my dog for a walk at around 10:30. As soon as we're out the door, he starts acting really agitated. I figured he just really needed to go. As we walk down the driveway, I hear a rustling from the tree in the neighbor's yard that's a few feet away, and I see a large dark shape. We ran like hell to the street, as a bear was now climbing down and was between us and the door. It wandered away without incident, and surprisingly, my dog still needed to poop. Story 3. 2 years ago, I had a horrible case of the flu. I remember going to bed on the third day of my sickness, and as far as I can remember, went straight to sleep. When I regained consciousness, I'm sitting against a tree, 1.5 miles into my favorite hiking trail on Widow's Peak that overlooks the Illinois River at about 9 a.m. I have no recollection of getting there, but it's a 35 miles drive, most of which is on a winding pigtail of a road. Most of the trail is either steep, a long sheer cliff, washed out, read no real trail, or a combination of all three. I don't even know what possessed me to go out there. The only clue I have is that at around 11 p.m. the night before I wrote, "I go to seek a great perhaps," on Facebook, which suggests that I did this at night, which is even more disconcerting as my only flashlight was at home. The tree to the right of the people in the picture, with most of its bark stripped off, has a small nook at its base that forms a natural seat that's fairly comfortable. That's where I woke up. Not the branch with the sawed limbs that is prominent, the one that is directly above the former's right upper fork. Story 4. When I was a young teen, I had several bouts of sleep paralysis. Of course, back then I never heard of this condition and it scared the living hell out of me. I was convinced there was someone standing in my doorway, but despite every fiber of my being trying to move, I was unable to turn to look for myself. It seemed to take forever till I was slowly able to regain motor functions, and for a long time I was convinced it was an alien abduction. Really freaked me out terribly. I have sleep paralysis. It's terrifying, and if I don't get up and move immediately after I'm able to, and instead go right back to sleep, it keeps fucking happening. So bad. I just focus on moving my right index finger and breathing. Story 5. Had someone try to break into the house while my parents were out at dinner. My brother and I were home alone. I was about 14 at the time and he was 9. I was gaming in my room and my bro came to tell me he'd heard something at the back door. So, to reassure him, I went to the back door and listened. Heard something skittering on the back deck. I assumed it was a cat. Then I heard heavy creaking and the doorknob rattled. Nope. I ran to the kitchen and grabbed the biggest knife I could find, went back to the door, unlocked it, and opened it very slowly. The backyard was empty. Funny thing was, my teenager mind at the time said, "Well, everything's okay now." When my parents got back home a few hours later and we told them the story, they were horrified that we hadn't called them or the police immediately. Story 6. Okay, I live about a mile away from a major airport, so some planes fly over my house while descending. So, one night, it's about 1 a.m. I'm asleep, so this plane motherfucker decides to fly incredibly low over my house. This shakes my house. I wake up screaming. The plane was also really loud. I'm a bit afraid of planes now. Story 7. I was alone in my apartment and I decided to take a shower. I locked the door out of habit. It can only be locked and unlocked from the inside. My clean and dirty clothes are thrown on the floor of the bathroom in 2 separate piles. When I finished taking a shower, my clothes, both dirty and clean, were neatly folded into 2 separate stacks on the floor. The door was still locked. I take very quick showers. This happened in the span of 5 minutes. I have no explanation and I get goosebumps just thinking about it. This happened about a week ago and nothing like it has happened prior or since. Fuck. Story 8. I am reasonably sure my GPS is haunted. It's sometimes on when I enter my car and it always has a random destination marked on it. I usually don't investigate too closely and just turn it off, but it's still pretty weird. It has maybe a 15-minute battery life, so whenever it's on when I enter the car at the end of the day, that means it must have turned on within the last 15 minutes or so, and the battery is usually full, as if it turned on only minutes or seconds ago. And it's not only when I leave my car, when I leave it in my room it'll do the same thing. The creepiest it got was when I got back to my apartment after a 2-month trip, unlocked my bedroom, went in, and found the GPS on. It was just sitting on my desk with a near full charge, some random destination marked on it. Story 9. I grew up in a haunted house. I never want to experience any of that again, ever. The scariest thing that I can remember is when I was about 8 or 9. I remember waking up sometime in the middle of the night and heard the noise. Our house was small and we didn't have any fans going that made any noise, so we could hear everything throughout the house. What I did hear was down the hallway on top of the washing machine. We played board games that night and left them on top of the washer. When I woke up that night, I kept hearing the wheel from the game of life spinning and spinning. I put the blankets over my head and fell asleep that way. My grandparents own a haunted house. I semi-grew up there and was never ever nope comfortable. Short story. My adopted sister came to meet my side of the family and stayed in my room alone while I stayed at my boyfriend's house for some alone times. The next morning, she told me she thought it was weird that the 5-year-old was allowed to run up and down the stairs to the attic and play all night. Did aunt/uncle know? Then I showed her how the stairs were blocked off and so packed of stuff it would have been impossible. It was then she decided to sleep on the couch at boyfriend's house instead of a nice bed. Story 10. When I was 16, my parents lived in a temporary rented house in another part of Ocala, Florida. It was a pretty open neighborhood in a decent but not great part of town. One day I was home from school and the doorbell rang. A tall, disheveled-looking man, maybe like late 30s/early 40s, was at the door. He said hello and that his car had broken down and he needed to use the telephone. I told him I was sorry, but unfortunately I couldn't help. I just didn't feel comfortable with letting him inside. He shrugged his shoulders and walked down the street. As I watched out of the window, the guy gets into a car and drives right past the house, looking in my general direction. He couldn't see me behind the blinds. But the fact that his car was fine sent shivers down my spine. What would have happened had he gotten in? I don't know. Yeesh. Story 11. One time when I was 6, I got up in the middle of the night to pee. The window in the bathroom was right next to the toilet, and we lived on the 2nd floor. The window was blurred so no one could see in. I looked up and saw these bright luminescent eyes looking in the window. I remember looking at the eyes, and the eyes making an expression as if they were mocking me, and then continuing up the window. Sometimes I think it may have been a dream or my imagination because I was so young, but a big part of me still feels like it was real. Story 12. Years ago, my parents were out of town and I had about 9 people over at the time. It was about 9 or 10 p.m. and someone brought over the game Prototype. We had all the lights off and were just passing the controller around, messing around before we went out for the night. Everyone was just chilling. All of a sudden, we heard loud footsteps and saw someone get up from the couch and go to the bathroom. We didn't think much of it, just someone going to the bathroom. That's when we all looked around and everyone was still in the room. Everyone saw it and just looked at each other in shock. No one saw it directly, but from our peripheral view, we all agreed it looked like a Civil War soldier or something similar at that time. We all got up and went down the hall and it was super cold. Nothing else happened that night, but everyone was freaking out. 3 of them are chicken shits and still won't come over to my house at night anymore. I did some research and found out that there was an old Confederate base not even half a mile away from my house. I don't think that it was really scary, and I'm not a so-called ghost believer, but it still was cool. Story 13. Walking to a friend's house in Fort Greene, Brooklyn. Not exactly the kind of neighborhood I should have been in. Note, I was 16, 130 pounds, but whatever. I get about 3 blocks away from where my friend's house is, and I see these 2 guys arguing about money. Apparently, one owed the other money, and the other was not happy about it. I decide that it's not a good idea to walk past them. They were about 3/4 of the way down the block that I was on, so I figured that 1/4 of a block is far enough. As soon as I get halfway across the street, one of the guys pulls out a gun and blasts the other guy 3 times in the chest. He looks around to make sure that nobody saw, but of course I did. I shit you not when I tell you that if I had been 1 inch back, I would have been dead. I got around the corner of the block and I hear 2 shots. One of them hit the wall of the building I was next to, a fucking inch from my head. Needless to say, I booked it to my friend's house crying hysterically. Never again. Note, this is the 2nd time I've posted this. Story 14. My ex-husband and I lived in a very old house with a huge bedroom. My 15-month-old daughter was sleeping in my bed with me one night, and my ex-husband was in the living room watching the TV. The door was closed tight. Something woke me up from a sound sleep, and I sat up. My little daughter sat up too, and pointed to the east end of the room and said, "Daddy?" I looked, and there, in front of the window, was a man looking outside. I called for my ex-husband, confused, still sleepy. He was in the living room the whole time. The man at the window never even turned, but he was gone when my ex came in and checked on us. It creeps me out that my little daughter saw the ghost too. This wasn't the last time we would see this man in the house, and we all had numerous dreams with him in them. Worst part? The house was torn down after we moved, and I totally still worry about what happened to the ghost. Story 15. I was standing on a street corner waiting to cross when a guy kitty-cornered to me starts walking entirely across the intersection to where I was. Not at me or anything, just to my corner. It was late evening, so traffic wasn't super heavy, but nevertheless he made it about 3/4 of the way across before a little Toyota braked too late and slammed into him. He ended up under the car too fast to follow. The driver and I did nothing for a few seconds while our brains caught up. I ran over as she got out of the car in a giant panic. She was just in shock, saying, "Oh my God," over and over. I get out my cell phone and get on the ground to look under the car. There's no one there. I get up and look around. Couple of people watching, but no one that looked like that dude, and no one injured. I asked if someone saw where he went, but they said no. Hood dented, bumper on the car smashed in, no jaywalker in sight. We called the cops anyway, but they didn't seem to really care about the guy as long as they didn't need an ambulance. I think they figured we were lying. Still haven't been able to figure out what could have happened. Story 16. I lived in a student house last year, and we would go sit under the stairs at night and use ghost calling apps on our phones, and we would all get paranoid. But one time we left the room and decided to play a game of Crazy Wheel, and my two friends ended up having to slow dance to the song Everybody Hurts. They got halfway through the song, and then we paused the music to move on and closed the laptop. We eventually went back under the stairs hours later. Within 5 minutes of chasing ghosts, we hear the voice loudly singing Everybody Hurts, and then abruptly shuts off. We run out of the room and check the laptop to find that it was still closed, and when we opened it, the song was not even loaded to the spot where those words are said. We could not replicate it. Story 17. This happened quite some time ago. I was 13 or 14. My father was a bartender at a local steakhouse, and I often spent time after school with him at work. One night after closing, my dad went to put some things into a large walk-in freezer. When he tried to open the door, it wouldn't budge. The lever was free and unlocked, but the door wouldn't move. He called me over to try and help. This freezer had a one-way door on it and would only open inwards. So with both of our body weight, we were eventually able to push it open forcefully. And when we did, we discovered what was inside. The freezer's contents, shelves, and all were pushed up against the door, keeping it from opening. We tried to explain this by saying that it was an earthquake, or the shelves had just fallen, but the way they were stacked flush against the door made those impossible. It was as if somebody purposefully blocked the door, but if so, they would not have been able to exit the freezer. My father and I rarely spoke of this to each other, let alone anyone else. To this day, it still confuses me greatly. Story 18. I used to live in one of the most violent cities in California, Richmond. It's the city the movie Coach Carter happened in reality and in the movie. I used to run late at night because I hate running in warm weather. I was coming down a hill at a pretty good pace in a crappy residential neighborhood when I saw a tall guy walking in the same direction, back to me, on the sidewalk about 50 yards in front of me. Not wanting to startle him, I did what I usually do. I kinda slapped my feet on the ground and coughed a bunch. He didn't turn around, so at the driveway before I would have caught up to him, I ran out to the street. Well, me moving around him definitely caught his attention. He reached into his waistband, produced a handgun, pointed it right at me, and let out a kind of muffled "duh" sound, all in one quick motion. I jumped back, put my hands up, and said, "Whoa, whoa, whoa, whoa." He let out a sigh and said something like, "Damn, don't sneak up on a brother like that," and I went running off. A month later, I saw what might have been the same guy get shot on the same street corner. Story 19. I live on a small mountain that has some thick forest surrounding my development, and we got a lot of wildlife that roams around the streets. No big deal. One night I get home from a friend's house, get out of my car when I hear some shuffling coming from the bushes near my shed, and when I looked up I saw the most ominous looking, huge, black figure and it shot shivers down my spine. As I was looking at it, I was terrified and wanted to run, but my body was paralyzed. I was literally petrified. The figure, so I thought, seemed to be moving closer and my body getting stiffer and stiffer with every passing moment, and then my mother pulled into the driveway and I snapped out of the trance I was in, looked back over at my shed, and there was nothing there. Story 20. One night, sleeping in my dorm room, I felt someone watching me, and I was paralyzed for at least 5 minutes. I turned my head and I swear I saw ghosts. I quickly turned my head back around and started freaking out, trying to calm myself. There's no way you saw ghosts. They aren't real. Still feeling watched, after another 5 minutes, I get the courage to bolt out of bed, to the door, and out into the hallway with my eyes closed. Out of the room, I knock on my buddy's door across the hall and ask to sleep in his room. I tell the story. He doesn't believe me and forces me back into the room to prove it. I'm scared as fuck, but we, 3 of us now, go in. After about 2 minutes of being mocked by my buddies, one goes, "Haha, Josh, I told you, holy shit, ah!" as he points to the closet, and we all look up and see the same thing. The 3 of us run into the hall screaming like girls, which wakes up our RA. Eventually, our resident hall director comes by. We told her our story, to which she simply replied, "We haven't had reports of ghosts in that room." We all kind of stopped and looked at her. She was deadpan serious, and it was the scariest thing of that night.